A missile traveling at 1 mile every single second, no warning, no second chance, and it is heading straight for the most powerful warship ever built. That is not a movie plot. That is the real threat facing US aircraft carriers right now. China already has missiles in service that travel at over Mach 10. Russia has a ship-launched hypersonic weapon that flew into combat in February 2024. And the Pentagon has officially admitted in a declassified report that China now holds the world's leading hypersonic missile arsenal. Every one of those weapons was designed with one primary target in mind: the American aircraft carrier. So what happens when one of those missiles is actually launched? What does the US Navy do in the seconds between detection and impact? And here is the question nobody is asking. Is the answer already in place, or is the Navy racing against a clock it might not be able to beat? Stay with me, because the answer is more layered, more expensive, and more surprising than most people realize. To understand how America defends its carriers, you first need to understand why hypersonic missiles are different from anything the Navy has faced before. Ballistic missiles follow a predictable arc. Cruise missiles fly slow enough to track. Hypersonic weapons do neither. They travel at Mach 5 or faster. They glide through the upper atmosphere, and they maneuver mid-flight. You cannot predict where they are going from where they started. At Mach 10, a missile covers roughly 10 miles every single second. From the moment of detection, defenders may have 20 seconds or less to identify, assign a weapon, fire, and intercept. That is the problem. Now here is what America has built to solve it. If you agree that the men and the women of the US Navy deserve every resource America can give them, type US Navy in the comments below. These sailors train for this exact scenario every single day. The first wall, the eyes in the sky. The US Navy does not defend a carrier with one weapon. It defends it with 5 separate layers of protection, each one designed to catch what the previous one missed. Think of it as 5 walls between the incoming missile and the ship. The first and outermost wall is the one most people never think about: the aircraft already in the air. Every carrier strike group operates what the Navy calls a combat air patrol. Fighter jets, primarily the FA-18E and FA-18F Super Hornets, are kept airborne at all times around the clock when the threat level demands it. Flying above them, acting as the eyes of the entire strike group, is the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye. The E-2D is not a fighter. It is not an attack aircraft. It is a flying radar station, and it is one of the most important planes in the entire American military. Its radar, the ANAPYN, can track threats at ranges exceeding 550 kilometers. At altitude, it has a line of sight that no ship radar can match. It can detect a hypersonic launch far earlier than any vessel on the surface. And through a system called NIFC-CA, the Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter Air Network, it can instantly share that tracking data with every ship, every plane, and every weapon system in the strike group simultaneously. What that means in practice is extraordinary. A destroyer 40 miles away from the carrier can receive a firing solution from the E-2D and launch a missile at a target its own radar has not even seen yet. The whole strike group shoots as one organism, not as individual ships. That is the first advantage America has built. The second wall, Aegis and the Interceptors. The second wall is the Aegis weapon system, and this is where the heavy firepower lives. Positioned across the carrier are Arleigh Burke class destroyers. These ships carry the Aegis combat system, one of the most capable missile defense platforms ever built. The newest version comes equipped with the AN-SPY-6 radar, a system so sensitive it is roughly 30 times more capable than the older radar it replaced. That extra sensitivity matters enormously against hypersonic weapons because those weapons fly at lower altitudes than traditional ballistic missiles, and other radars often lose them in the background clutter of the atmosphere. The primary weapons launched from these destroyers against hypersonic threats are the SM-3 Block 2A and the SM-6. The SM-3 Block 2A is the longer range option. It was co-developed with Japan, travels at speeds exceeding Mach 10 itself, and uses what is called a hit-to-kill system. There is no explosive warhead. It physically crashes into the incoming missile at closing speeds so fast that the kinetic energy alone destroys the target. It is designed primarily for the threats in the upper atmosphere or above it. The Pentagon plans to buy 12 more SM-3 Block 2A interceptors in its fiscal year 2026 budget, a clear signal of how serious this threat is being taken. But here's the weapon that the Navy is betting the most on right now, the SM-6. The SM-6 was not originally built for hypersonic defense. It was an air defense missile, but the Navy recognized that it had potential and began upgrading it specifically to handle maneuvering hypersonic targets in the terminal phase, meaning the final moments before the impact when the missile is closest and moving fastest. In August 2025, the U.S. Missile Defense Agency officially certified what is called the SM-6 Sea-Based Terminal Increment 3. The agency director, Lieutenant General Heath Collins, announced after a series of tests that ships carrying this upgraded system will be protecting U.S. fleets moving forward. The key tests, codenamed Stellar Banshee, took place on March 24, 2025. The U.S. Pinckney, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, successfully demonstrated the ability to detect, track, and engage an advanced maneuvering hypersonic target in the Pacific Ocean near Kauai, Hawaii. Lieutenant General Collins described this capability with honesty and precision. He called it the last look, one shot is what you got option. That is not marketing language. That is a military officer telling you exactly how tight the margin is. The third, fourth, and fifth wall, the inner rings. Now here is where the picture gets even more interesting. And this is the part that most coverage misses entirely. The third wall is the ESSM Block 2. This stands for Evolved Sea Sparrow Missile. The upgrade to Block 2 was a critical improvement because it gave the missile its own active radar seeker. The older version required a ship's radar that continuously illuminate the incoming target, like holding a flashlight on a moving object so that the missile can follow the light, against a target moving at Mach 8 and maneuvering unpredictably. Maintaining the lock is nearly impossible. The Block 2 missile finds the target on its own. It reached full operational capability in 2022 and is now standard aboard Burke-class destroyers. Its engagement range is roughly 27 nautical miles, the third ring around the carrier. The fourth wall is the RIM-116 Rolling Airframe Missile, also called RAM. This one sits closer, roughly 5 nautical miles from the carrier. RAM uses a two-stage seeker system. First, it locks onto the radar emissions coming from the incoming missile itself. It rides those signals like a homing signal. Then, in the final seconds, it switches to infrared guidance, tracking the heat the missile generates. The Block 2 upgrade gave RAM the ability to handle fast maneuvering, low radar cross-section targets. This system is mounted directly on the carrier and on some escorts, meaning it is organic. It does not depend on any other ship to do its job. At this point in the engagement, the strike group may have already fired multiple interceptors, but a sufficiently fast, sufficiently maneuverable hypersonic missile could still be coming through, which brings us to the fifth and final wall. The Mk-15 Phalanx CIWS, pronounced CIWS, a 20mm Gatling gun that fires at roughly 3,000 rounds per minute. It uses a closed-loop radar system that tracks both the incoming target and the outgoing rounds simultaneously, automatically correcting its aim in real time at 1 to 2 nautical miles with a hypersonic missile incoming. This gun has fractions of a second to operate. It is a last ditch. The Navy does not like to rely on it against hypersonics, but it is there, and it fires automatically without requiring a human to pull a trigger. Alongside the Phalanx sits the SEWIP Block 3 system, Surface Electronic Warfare Improvement Program. This is not a gun and it's not a missile. It is a jammer. It attempts to blind or deceive the incoming missile seeker, breaking its lock on the carrier against radar-guided hypersonics. A well-timed burst of electronic interference could send the weapons off course in the final seconds. It is not a guaranteed kill, but every disruption increases survival odds. The gaps, what the Navy still has to solve. Now here is the honest part, and this channel does not hide the hard truth from you. America's defense architecture against hypersonic missiles is the most advanced in the world. The 5-layer system described above represents decades of deployment and hundreds of billions of dollars in investment. But defense analysts, the Congressional Research Service, and even the Pentagon itself have acknowledged that significant gaps still exist. The first gap is saturation. A single hypersonic missile is a serious challenge, but China's doctrine does not involve one missile. The concern is coordinated salvo, 10, 15, 20 hypersonic weapons fired simultaneously from multiple ships, submarines, and aircrafts at the same carrier strike group. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carries roughly 96 vertical launch system cells total. Those cells are shared between anti-submarine weapons, land attack, cruise missiles, and missile defense interceptors. In a saturation attack, the math becomes very uncomfortable very quickly. The second gap is the altitude problem. Hypersonic glide vehicles fly between roughly 40 and 100 kilometers altitude, below where the SM-3 performs best, but far above the sea level zone where close-in weapons excel. The middle zone, sometimes called the mid-course gap, is the hardest to defend. The Navy's long-term answer to this is the Glide Phase Interceptor, currently under development, with a delivery target set for fiscal year 2035. That is still a decade away. The third gap is plasma blackout. When a weapon flies at Mach 5 or faster, the air around it heats to plasma temperatures. That superheated sheath absorbs and scatters radar signals, making the missile harder to track. At the exact moment you need the most precise solution. Researchers are working on multi-radar techniques to compensate, but it remains a known challenge. The future, lasers, networks, and what comes next. The future, however, is not just about interceptor missiles. The Navy is actively pursuing directed energy weapons, lasers, as a long-term answer to the magazine problem. The Helios system, a 60-kilowatt laser installed on the USS Preble, successfully downed 4 drones in a 2025 demonstration. The appeal is obvious. A laser fired from a nuclear-powered carrier theoretically has an almost unlimited magazine. Each shot costs somewhere between $1 and $10, compared with $1 million to $10 million for a defense missile. But current laser power levels are nowhere near sufficient to defeat an armored hypersonic missile. The Navy estimates it needs around 300 kilowatts to defeat anti-ship cruise missiles. Getting to that level reliably at sea remains a work in progress. And beyond lasers, there is the question of the kill chain itself. Information is everything. The entire 5-layer defense only functions if the data flowing between the E to D, the destroyers and the fighters, and the carrier itself is uninterrupted and accurate. The NIFC-CA network is America's greatest force multiplier in the fight. It is also, as any military planner will tell you, a target. Electronic warfare, cyber attack, and satellite disruption are all tools adversaries would deploy to blind the carrier strike group before the missiles ever launched. That is why the Navy does not rely solely on any one layer. The philosophy is redundancy. If one system fails, the next one engages. If that one fails, the next one engages. The carrier's survival depends not on perfection, but on depth. The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's newest and most powerful carrier, cost $13.3 billion to build. It is 9 stories tall above the waterline. Its flight deck covers 5 full acres. It carries 4 full squadrons of fighter jets and is powered by 2 A-1B nuclear reactors that could, in theory, supply enough electricity to power a directed energy weapon capable of shooting down the very missiles built to sink it. The same technology that makes a carrier a target, its size, its power generation, its nuclear propulsion, is also what makes it uniquely capable of hosting the future of missile defense. No other ship in any Navy has that combination. The men and women serving aboard carrier strike groups today train for hypersonic engagement continuously. The weapon systems around them are being upgraded, certified, and expanded right now, not in some distant future program. The SM-6 Sea-Based Terminal certification in August 2025 was not a headline most people saw. But for every sailor aboard a carrier strike group in the Pacific, it meant something real. It meant their ship had a better chance of coming home. The hypersonic threat is real. So is the answer America is building. Outro. 5 layers of defense, hundreds of ships, aircraft, and weapon systems working as one network. A laser weapon under development that could change the math entirely. And a generation of sailors trained to fight and win in a threat environment that did not exist a decade ago. That is how the US Navy is defending its carriers against the most dangerous missiles ever built. If this video gave you something worth knowing, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what we cover next. The next video goes even deeper into the weapons and technology, keeping America's Navy ahead of every threat on the horizon.